Josh, thanks for joining us today. Why should we listen to this podcast?
So a number of years ago, I bought a business, an existing business. And in this podcast, I share some things I did and some mistakes I made. So hopefully, if you're listening to this, you can learn from that and at least not repeat the mistakes I made.
Hi, and welcome to Serenity Now, a place for entrepreneurs to ask questions, learn, get connected, and be inspired. Join us as we talk about all things business and the search for the ever-elusive Serenity Now in both business and personal life.
Welcome to another episode of Serenity Now for entrepreneurs, where we talk all things about business, how to start, build, grow, and exit businesses. Today's topic will be buying into a business, some of the hurdles or challenges or unexpected things you might not have considered, and some successes. And we have one entrepreneur that's coming on to share his story. We're really excited about it. My name is Rita Kim. I'll be one of your co-hosts today. I've got two other beautiful Serenity sisters with me today. Welcome, Candace.
Hello, Rita.
Hey, and Peggy. Welcome.
Thank you, Rita.
Great. I'm going to turn it all over to Peggy because she's brought our guest in today. So go, Peggy.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce you all to Josh Rottenberg. He is a friend and a client, and we met about 10 years ago when he was actually going through due diligence to acquire a company that he was planning to buy. And they asked me to do the assessment of the shred claim, which of course we did. And it developed a long relationship, which we still have with Computerol Systems and Josh. And so I'm going to just flip it over to Josh for a little introduction, and he can tell us about himself, and then we'll dive into this very, very interesting topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Peggy. Good day, everyone, and thank you much for joining. About 90 seconds about me. I'm originally an American, and I wanted to go overseas, and I started off in the Middle East, and I pivoted to Asia. I spent 5 years in the Middle East. I spent 16 years in Asia, and then 6 years in Germany. And I ended up in the chemical and pharmaceutical industries, even though I don't have any kind of technical background. Working at the end of the day in a large global corporation, and it was great until it wasn't. And I decided to really pivot up into my professional life, and I guess personal life, and through a series of decisions, decided to immigrate to Canada, and then looked at either Toronto or Vancouver, and decided on Vancouver. Another decision I made was to purchase a company. I was too young to retire, not wealthy enough to retire, and I enjoyed working. And I knew I wasn't entrepreneurial enough to start something from scratch. So I thought the best thing to do was to purchase a business that was for sale, and for sale for the right reasons. It was meaning not a distressed sale. Took me a lot longer than I expected. I had my criteria, and it took 5 years before I found this business. And as Peggy announced at her intro, one of the components of the business was SHRED, which is the Canadian federal program for credit for R&D. And I asked her, I met her through an introduction, someone at a bank, and asked her to take a look at the missions for the previous years, which she did and declared it kosher. And then after I took over the business and wanted to have a SHRED consultant every year, because it was a fairly important part of the business.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, well, so one of the things Peggy said was you should look at the CRA, which is the IRS of Canada, as your most important customer. And I've always kept that in the back of my mind. So, of course, we have real customers who buy our products and services and pay us for it. But at the same time, we do quite a bit of R&D and want to get credit for that. And so that relationship has continued now for 10 years.
So, Josh, I'm just sitting here thinking about when you decided to buy a business. Did you have an industry, or did you have a type of business you planned to buy? Or how did you get even to there?
So good question. These are my criteria. I wanted something, an actual tangible product. and something that was made. And that's just because of the industry I came from, chemical and pharmaceutical. So I didn't want distribution or a pure service. So that was number one.
Okay.
Number two, this being Greater Vancouver, there's not a lot of manufacturing going on. And it's certainly not in Vancouver. It's out in the outskirts where land is cheaper. And if anyone knows Vancouver, there's a lot of bridges and commuting can be bad. So I said to myself, one bridge. That was a criterion as well, one bridge. I was living in Vancouver and didn't want to move 100 kilometers away.
Right.
Number 3, even though it was a product, I wanted something that the Chinese could not compete against. I had lived in China many years and had dealt with Chinese competition, right? So it had to be a product that Chinese couldn't compete with. And number 4 was a price point, so something I could afford. I looked at a lot of different businesses. The lowest point, it was when I looked at a car wash business and got as far as a name for the business, the Joshi Wash. But well, it's either the Joshi Wash or the Josh I Wash. But in any event, I came to my senses and said I didn't want to go into car washing. And then this business came up, which is private, so non-retail gas stations, hardware and software management systems for non-retail gas stations. Something I'd never heard of before. I knew nothing about the industry, but it was for sale. It was for sale for the right reasons. And it took about 9 months from start to finish.
Okay, well, what did it look like then when you take over a business? You walk in, you're kind of cold, you don't know the industry, you don't know the employees, you've seen the books, you've done your due diligence, it seems all good. What did the first 3 months look like?
So the first thing I did was because I took out debt from a bank, had covenants, and I never spent so much money before. So I hired an accountant. The business did not have an accountant. The business had someone who did bookkeeping that was so-so, that I found out through due diligence. So I hired an accountant, and that allowed me to sleep at night.
I'm expecting Candace to give a big cheer right now.
Just waiting. Just waiting.
And that gentleman is still with me 10 years later, and he's one of 2 business husbands I have. I trust him implicitly and explicitly, and he has really grown as a professional as well in the business. So I'm really proud of that. I inherited a bunch of people. That was part of the contract. A mistake I made, so for anyone who's hiring in Canada, one of the people was on disability. So while I was not paying his salary, I had to pay his extended insurance. And that took a few years. If you agree to buy a business and take over all the people, make sure they are all currently employed and no one's on disability.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah, me either, actually. And I've been hit by it. So
that would be the diligence process. Typically, as you go through, we've just worked through several takeovers, one recently a franchise takeover. And so typically the new staff or the staff existing that would get brand new contracts. And so things have gotten a little more sophisticated perhaps than 10 years ago as you did the purchase. And so now one of the biggest things we look at in the due diligence side is the people. Not only disability, claims, issues, liabilities, all can continue forward if contracts aren't started new and fresh from day one.
We had new contracts, but people got their seniority, right? So that transferred over. So I inherited about 15 employees. I only knew one of them because it had been kept secret from everyone else. The first thing I did was nothing other than ask questions and listen. I didn't come in to change anything.
I love that strategy.
Keep everything going because it was a profitable business. Keep everything going. And again, just ask questions and listen. And I said I would do that for the first 3 months before making any changes.
Don't they say the 100 days or something is the
Something
number?
like that, yeah.
100-day rules.
Yeah, 100-day thing.
Yeah. I did make one change, though, in the second month, like in week 6, because it turned out for every invoice we issued, there were 3 printed copies. There was a white copy, there was a yellow copy, and there was a pink copy. So besides making it difficult for the copy machine, the white copy was for, I don't remember what, the yellow copy was to file away chronologically, and the pink copy was to file away alphabetically. So I said, we don't really need that, and we cut it down to 1 copy. And so I'm a big environmentalist when it comes to that. There's no need to waste paper unnecessarily. So that was internally. Externally, I decided that for the first year, whenever I met someone, whenever I met a dealer or a distributor or a contractor, I would ask them, tell me about yourself. Did you grow up wanting to do this? Sell tanks and dispensers and pumps, and how did you get to where you are? And I also did that with customers. And 1 year wasn't enough. And so I continued the second year. And often I still do when I meet people because People like to talk about themselves, usually. And it's a way of establishing a relationship to have the people talk about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did externally in order to learn about the industry.
Good for you. I like that strategy. I think what you're saying is true. It makes it personal. It makes you a person to them and not just a business that they deal with. I think that's a really good strategy for everyone. Like, it's much easier to communicate. It's much easier to pay. It's much easier to get paid when people know you.
It's also a great way to get to know the industry and the new area that you're in, and also look for gaps as well. I think that's fantastic, Josh. And then you don't really have to talk very much. You just download all this information and insight, and people don't understand the power of observation that you talked about and listening carefully, because that can hugely impact you and your business and your staff. So I love your strategy so far. This is exciting to me.
I think somebody's taken change management
Courses or something.
change management courses somewhere.
That's what I said. Like, change management is one of the most difficult things. I experienced it when I went to Deloitte, and I don't think they had a policy when they brought our company in. When we were in, we were floundering. We didn't have that one person to manage the change, to manage the people, to manage the new structure, to help us through it. It was a little bit sad in that way. So good on you, Josh, that you had some foresight to realize that this was a process.
It's funny because then there's the opposite, right? Where you're so excited, you get in, you're like, we use some different terminology in the finance world, but I got to make my mark is the gentlest way to say it. Candice is already laughing probably because she knows some of the words, but that's like, you got to say, I'm here, look at me now, but it wasn't about you.
I think if it were a distress sale, that action was needed immediately, it would have been different. If I may say one other thing, buying a business, the only other business I owned was a lemonade stand, when I was 7 years old or something. So it's a scary thing. And there were books available, how to buy a business. I read them. There were books available on how to sell a business. And I tell people that they should spend the $30 to buy those books, or if they don't want to spend it, take them from the library. And recently, I came into this, as I said earlier, really not knowing anyone or anything about this industry. And it's a pretty closed industry, even though Canada is a tremendously large country. And also we have business in the United States. Everyone seems to know everyone else, right? So you got to create your reputation, which can take time, but it's very easy to damage.
So Josh, after your 3 months or so of observations, learnings, listenings, internally and externally, how did you come up with your next steps and prioritize those? Talk to us a little bit about that.
One of the things I did after 4th to 8th month is I fired 2 people. I started to enunciate some company values. I didn't use them that much, but there was one person who just didn't fit the culture, who was a difficult person. And the relevant people who I spoke to all agreed that he could be let go. Then I fired at the same day someone else that was a surprise to everyone in the company. And that person's attitude was more negative than positive, toward me at least. One result of that was a big impact on the company, on everyone else, meaning, okay, Josh is serious. Josh is not a pushover. And yes, Josh is a listener and can be warm and fuzzy, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't perform, you don't have a place in the company. I would say that was the biggest change I made within the first year internally.
Yeah, it's a big change. Big change. Did it take you a while to arrive at that, or were you quite certain that you were going to go there? Like, I found firing people, I waited way too long.
What do they say? You should be slow to hire
and quick to fire.
And quick to fire.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to fire someone.
It is hard.
I mean, it is for me. I have become more astute during self-evaluation, more astute in exactly what I'm looking for when hiring, and then quicker to fire. And I know this is moving away from the core of this
it's all part of it, isn't it?
Podcast about buying and acquiring a business and absorbing it. But if I may say now that I've become explicit about this, we have 3 company values, and I need to evaluate that the candidate fits those values. And in specifically, I look for what I call now the 3 H's. The person is happy, the person is humble, and the person is hungry. Happy, humble, hungry. So happy, basically their disposition. No one's happy every single day, but basically a positive disposition in their life. humble, so they're not arrogant, and hungry. They want to prove themselves. And that's made a difference. And that's made it easier for me when evaluating people to figure out sooner rather than later if they're going to be a cultural fit. It's all about the culture, right? It really is.
Good for you.
The skills can be learned.
I'm guessing that those that hungry, happy,
Humble.
Humble.
happy, hungry, humble are pretty closely aligned with the values that you set up too. I'm guessing so.
Yeah, and those are on our website, but we go above and beyond and we find a way and we got your back.
Awesome.
So now we've talked about the first 3 months and we've talked about the next changes. What do you wish you did differently? If anything, maybe you didn't. Maybe you were happy with it.
I would say actually in the due diligence process. So for anyone who's acquiring a business, you got to have the best team around you that you can afford. You need a lawyer at the appropriate time. You need a financial advisor at the appropriate time, and that can be an accountant or not. And you need preferably a good business person, someone who has a good business mind. I took responsibility for the due diligence, and I didn't pay enough attention to the market and marketing. And I think if I had asked better questions, I would have gotten more information or lack thereof, which in retrospect could have, and I would say should have, or at least it would have been worth the attempt to pay a little bit less money.
So price was affected by the potential market.
I think so. The understanding of the market that they had was a lot different than what I was led to believe based on the information they provided.
What would you do different in that instance? Would you hire someone with a specialty in that industry and the marketing? And
Well, that's interesting. Not necessarily. I just would have asked more questions instead of just passing over and looking at the other stuff. So they had a breakdown of sales. And this company sold, and we still do today through dealers and distributors. And so they had a breakdown of what percent of sales were in British Columbia and in Alberta and in each of the provinces in the United States. And I'd say about 65% was in Alberta. I learned afterwards, because I didn't probe, that the statistics they were showing me was the dealers they were selling to. It wasn't necessarily the end users, the dealers' customers. Not everything sold to Alberta stayed in Alberta. Some went to Manitoba, some went to Saskatchewan. So if I had asked, now give me a breakdown of your customers, your so-called end users, your dealers' customers, right? What industries, what provinces? They would not have been able to answer those questions because they didn't have the details. So just to play out that scenario, how can I buy a business where you're in the center of the market is really limited, right? It's only to your next step, but it's not to where it's ultimately going to. So I would say that was the biggest drawback when doing the due diligence. In terms of the first couple of years, I would not have done anything differently. Nothing that pops up that glaringly shows I did something incorrectly. It would have been nice if the bank covenants were not as strict as they were, I mean, there were some nights that the accountant and I were like, oh, man, are we going to make the covenant? What's going to happen, right? Are they going to call in the loan? But of course, the bank wants you to succeed, right? So they can be a little bit flexible. But still, I was new to all this. But other than that, nothing glaringly I would have done differently. I don't think I made an error at all in selecting this business. One other thing I would have done, now that you're asking me this question, a mistake I made, it wasn't from the acquisition, but it came a little bit later. I relied too much on engineers and not being an engineer myself. I mean, there were books about how a non-engineer could manage or lead engineers, like they're a special breed of individuals.
Different thinking.
But different thinking, different approach. Yeah,
very much.
We developed a new product. That was a big project. And I left it to the engineers because they had many more years of experience than I had in the industry. And I wasn't an engineer. That was a mistake because we ended up with a product that was a bit over-engineered. Any new product development should not be led by engineers. They do all the work, but the specifications and functionality needs to be led by someone outside of engineering. I'm not saying that because it's just for a startup or acquired company. It's evidently common throughout any kind of industry, but it certainly impacted me and it was a mistake I made. I would say that's the largest mistake I've made in the 10 years I've been in this business.
Not an uncommon one, though, Josh. I see that all the time.
Not uncommon.
Yeah, I see that quite a bit. But I actually love your story. I'm really happy that you joined us today. And I think we're at the point in the podcast where I'd like to do a quick fire. Quick fire is just go around the room and see what resonated with everyone from our conversation today. And if you have any extra special thoughts you want to tag on at the end, feel free. So I'm going to talk to Rita first. I'm going to ask what happened with her today, what she learned, what insight she has.
Well, first, I wanted to thank you for bringing Josh on, Peggy. I really appreciate it. And Josh, thank you for being so open and candid and sharing part of this process. I'm sure sometimes people think it's only good to share the good stuff, but we all learn from the hard stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's the purpose of this podcast. So I really appreciate it. One of the things that I found just mind-blowing right at the very beginning was you said it took you 5 years to pick the right company. And, I have a slight question and a comment on it, but would you have did it again? Would you have waited the 5 years? Was it worth the wait?
It was definitely worth the wait. If someone had said to me beforehand, it's going to be 5 years and you're going to be living off your savings for 5 years,
yikes,
I might have thought twice. Fortunately, having lived in China for so many years and you get a lot of hardship pay and there's not a lot to spend it on. So I had that cushion. And the other thing I would say is because I was in this period of time, 5 years, you can go soft, right? You still need to be involved. So I got involved in some nonprofit organization. I was chairman of the board of a nonprofit, and that kept my skills sharp for managing and leading and directing.
Fantastic. So it was definitely worth the wait. I think one of the things that I find in this whole kind of what they call the succession tsunami of businesses changing hands, and it'll just always be ongoing, but it just seems like there's a little more than less these days, is making sure you take that time to determine those goals of what it is and what kind of company you do want and sticking to your guns like you did, Josh. So I think that was one of the pieces that resonated with me. I think it's also about just life in general. Sometimes we kind of take a shortcut or we compromise on this or that when it comes to either, it could be anything in life from friendship to work to business and staff, as we talked about too. And I think it's okay. And as we get older, I think the more we start learning how to stick to our guns, the old way of saying it.
If I could just add one other comment that had to do with the price. I was concerned whether I'd be overpaying. And a cousin of mine in the States who was in the finance field said, there's no such thing as overpaying. This isn't a pure financial transaction. If you're going to enjoy yourself, if you're going to be able to pay yourself a decent salary, actually, he said it in reverse. If you're going to be able to pay yourself a decent salary, earn some money, and enjoy yourself, that's what's important. So for people who are looking to buy a business, and you're not an investment banker or something, you're not looking just to flip it, I would suggest consider that as well. Are you going to enjoy yourself and be able to pay, earn some money from it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Candace, what are your thoughts on this one today?
Well, I'm always happy to hear about effective change management. And I admire that you were able to change relatively nothing for 100 days. Because I have to admit, I'm the type of person who just wants to get in there and get their hands dirty. And I would have had a challenge sticking to my guns on that one. And I am very impressed. So change management is important. You cannot underestimate the value of it. So
I'm kind of a fireman, right? I'm really operational. If there's a problem, let's just solve it. And that's my natural way of being. The problem with that is everyone comes to you for everything. And I've learned the hard way over time that the response to what should I do or what do you think should be done? And 8 out of 10 times people know. They just want confirmation. And as a CEO, that makes my life easier. People come to me just to check, but not to make all the decisions.
Good one.
So that's giving up control, right? But if you have people you can trust, you can do that.
Perfect. I think what I liked most, what I heard, is that you did nothing. And I agree with Candace. That is just so hard. I don't know, after 5 years, I'd be jumping at the bit to get going and to do something and to make change. I love change, but I can see the value of not doing the change in this situation. I think what you did was brilliant. I witnessed it. I've seen the employees. I didn't see them before, but I certainly saw that they were happy afterwards. And I thought you had a really nice group and good camaraderie in the group. And definitely I could feel the values. People live by the values that you've created there.
If I could just make one comment, Peggy. Mm-hmm. So it's not that I did nothing. It's asking questions and listening, active listening.
Active
That,
listening. That was a lot of doing,
and
but it appeared
a,
like nothing.
a lot of notes. I
Yeah.
mean, I took a lot of notes, right? So after the 90 days, I was ready to present some changes I wanted to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well done. Well done. I applaud you on that. Okay, Rita.
Thank you, Josh, for coming in today and helping us learn a little bit more on an intimate level on how you purchased a business, some of the insights that you gained, some ways that you wish you might have made some changes. But what I got mostly out of it was sticking to your guns, whether it's the goal and the type of business you want, change management, the values of your business, all of that has led to your continued success through these years. So congratulations and thank you for joining us. And want to say thank you also to Peggy and Candice. And to, of course, our listeners. Please share this episode with some entrepreneurs you know, and we hope that this episode has perhaps given you some serenity now. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and picked up some good tips and best practices that would benefit your entrepreneurial journey. Remember, none of the content in this podcast should be relied upon as standard legal or business advice. Always consult a professional for your specific business. You may know someone who could benefit from this podcast. Please share it with your business community, and perhaps it can give an entrepreneur you know some serenity now.